So we hear a lot about the story of Gideon in the Bible. But did you know that Gideon had to do something at home before he was commissioned to go to war and speak on behalf of God? Tune in today, Refuge Radio, as we look at the story of Gideon. Hey, what's up, everybody? This is episode 15 of Refuge Radio. So excited. Thank you for tuning in. If you're watching, I appreciate you watching. If you're listening, thank you for listening today. Hey, before we jump into our devotional or our lesson for today, I want to say a huge thank you to Troy Ferguson and Transformation Church for allowing us to be in this beautiful studio, use these lights, use the camera, use all the audio equipment. Really appreciate Troy and everything he does. And then also a huge shout out to Park Home. They do an amazing job with all the things that we have. We have a bunch of furniture that we use on set here. And so thank you for them. If you need some furniture, go check them out. They're an amazing store, and you will have some great finds that you'll be able to get there. And last announcement, today is May 4th, 2020. May the 4th be with you, all you Star Wars fans. I'm rocking my Star Wars hat. Got a bunch of Star Wars themed stuff I'm doing today. So hope you enjoy it. Hope you like it. Star Wars is an amazing series, and it talks about warriors. And today we're going to talk about a very similar warrior. And so this is going to be a two-part series that I hope you tune into, and I hope you get something out of. But before we jump in to this amazing story of the story of Gideon in the Bible, I just got a question for you. Have you ever started an exercise to get in shape and you quit? Or maybe you started a habit of trying to get up early and then you quit it. Or maybe you said you never were going to date that type of person ever again, and you dated that type of person. Maybe you said you weren't going to binge watch the rest of those episodes, but then 5 episodes later, you're there with Cheetos all over you and your Mountain Dew cans everywhere, and you're sucked into the Netflix binging. And I don't know if that's ever happened to you. Or maybe you said you were going to grow closer to God, but then you started out strong and then you slowly stopped doing those things that you need to do to grow closer to God. See, sometimes we start with good cycles in our lives. We have a good mindset, a good heart that we want to do the right thing, that we want to live the right way. And what's hard is when you begin to live in a healthy cycle, it's hard to stay in that. It's hard to maintain those things. And we have good intentions of always doing the right thing. We talk about New Year's resolutions and always wanting to do the right thing for New Year's. And we start out and then we start to kind of way off of that. Why? Because old habits die hard. Real hard. And what's interesting is when we find in the book of Judges in the Bible, we find that Israel is stuck in a cycle. They're wanting to go after God, and they have this period where they go after God with everything, but then years pass by and they kind of forget what God has done, and then all of a sudden they're back into being slaves to their enemy or being kept captive by their enemy, and they're in this cycle. And we actually see this cycle happen a ton to the nation of Israel, God's chosen nation, where we constantly are seeing them doing really well, going after God, and then all of a sudden, they forget about God and everything that He's done, and they begin to worship idols and do their own thing and build their own idols, and they grow away from God, and then something happens, and then they're kept captive, then they cry out. And so all throughout this book of Judges, we find that God sends judges, that's what they're called in the book of Judges. He sends judges to free these people. And what's interesting is if you have a Bible, I want you to open it up to Judges chapter 6, and we're going to be jumping into the story. That's very, very fascinating. It said, yet again, the people of Israel went back in doing evil in God's sight. That is the first verse. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. It says, so God put them under the domination of their enemies for 7 years. Midian overpowered Israel. Because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves hideouts in the mountains and caves and forts. The people of Israel, reduced to grinding into poverty by Midian, they began to cry out for God. See, what happened to Israel is they had intention of doing the right thing, but then fell into that old cycle. And we talk a lot about this throughout the scripture because we must remember what God did in our past so that we can have confidence of what God can do in our future. And sometimes we forget about all the great things that God has done, all the things that he's delivered us from, all the things that were accomplished. And we forget about those things because we look at the present situation and it's not what it should be, and it's not going the way we want it to be, and we don't think that God is in it. And then all of a sudden we begin to just doubt God. But we have to remember all of the great things that God has done for us. He has given you hope. He's given you peace. He's given you strength. God has already taken you through some of the hardest times of your life. And so we have to remember those things to help us get through the present things. And we have to remember what God has done so that we can live the way that we are intended to live. And what we see here in this passage is we see that Israel forgot about this. They haven't kept God as a central focus of their present. And they allowed the present situations to dictate to them what was going on. They forgot all that God has done. We must remember that God is always faithful in the present and in the past and in the future. God's faithfulness to us covers all of the timetable. You know, it's when you are aside from God, when you push God to the side and you do your own thing, oftentimes what ends up happening is you end up doing something you don't want to do at a place you don't want to be with people you don't want to be around. And that's what sin leads us to. So we find in verse 7 through 11, God sends them this prophet and he says, hey, you need to listen to me. You need to listen to me. I have these things that I need you to say, and I have this thing that you need to do. And they just continue to not listen. So if we jump to verse 11, this is what it says. One day the angel of God came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash, whose son was Gideon. And Gideon was found threshing wheat in a winepress out of the sight of the Midianites. So check this out. Gideon, this dude, as we read here, he's minding his own business and he's actually hiding in the wine press, doing his thing. And I imagine it this way, just because of the culture we're in. I imagine this dude, he's in the workroom. He's got his AirPods in. He's listening to his own music. He's doing his own thing. He's minding his own business, not worrying about anything, doing what he wants to do, hiding from the enemy because he doesn't want them coming in to steal all the great things that he's doing. But Gideon is just doing his thing his way. And he's just not really engaging in anything. Now, normally you would want to thresh wheat out in the open, because out in the open is where it gets done. But because the enemy was stealing everything from them, he had to do it in hiding. So Gideon is apparently scared out of his mind already, hiding in this place. And I love that God found him in the winepress. Let me explain that to you. Because he found Gideon in his place of hiding. And that's where God's going to find a lot of us when things are hard. It's interesting that sometimes we will choose to live in a place of fear rather than a place of faith. Because we're so scared of everything. And when we don't have faith in God, we will choose to live in that place of fear. When we forget what God has done, we will live in that place of fear. And that's what Gideon had done. He had forgotten all about what God had done, and he chose to live in that place of fear. So let's talk about something real quick. Let's talk about something that we've talked about before on this podcast, but I want to revisit because I believe that is very important. Let's talk about the anxiety, the social anxiety. Now, right now, we're in a season of quarantine, and the anxiety is through the roof. What really begins to happen, you're not in control. You begin to fear of what's happening. You're getting sweaty. You begin to feel things are closing in on you. You don't really want to talk to people because you're so afraid of everything. We live in a season of high anxiety. Anxiety is one of the number one things right now that people socially are dealing with. And it's a very real thing. And all of these things all of these things of a lack of control, of being afraid of talking to people, being afraid of the future, being afraid of what's going to happen, all of these things can lead to a major panic attack, wherever it might be. And I'll just be real with you, man. Anxiety is real. It's a very real thing. I'm a Christian and I love Jesus, but I will tell you full front that anxiety is a scary thing. I don't personally deal with it, but I deal with a generation that deals with it. I deal with friends that deal with it. I deal with family members that deal with it. And anxiety is a crippling thing that can come against you and can really hurt you. Anxiety is something that is used by the enemy to get into our heads and into our hearts to paralyze us so that we can't live the way that we're intended to live. And we allow anxiety to keep us in a place of fear. And what's great is God literally comes to where we're at in that place of anxiety. And he visits us exactly where we're at. And I love that. I think the other thing we're really afraid of that anxiety brings on is the fear of failure. Listen, nobody likes to fail at anything. I love to win. I always love to win. And I talk smack. I do all this stuff all the time of wanting to be a winner all of the time. But we're scared of failure. We're scared of failing in school, failing at our job, failing in relationships, failing in our family, failing in our marriages. We're afraid of disappointing those and messing up so big and so incredible that no one will forgive us. And so we have fear of failure. And again, what's great about God is that God will come to that place where you're at, in that anxiety, in that fear of failure, and he will visit you. If God is willing to visit Gideon in the place of hiding, God is willing to visit you in the place that you're at. So we have to have that understanding that there are so many fears that we could talk about. There are so many things out there that terrify us. But just like many of us, Gideon was in fear and he was down, hiding in a place. But this is what's awesome, because this is what it happens. In verse 12, it says, the angel of God appeared to him and said, God is with you, mighty warrior. And Gideon replied, with me? With me? If God is with us, then why is all this happening to us? Where are all the miracle wonders our parents and grandparents told us about? Didn't God deliver us from Egypt? The fact is, God has nothing to do with this. He has turned us over to Midian. See, I love Gideon's response here because it's a true response. Gideon's not faking this. This is raw and this is real. First thing he says is, who, me? Gideon questions whether or not God is talking to him, to who he is. How many times have we done that when God says something and you're like, who, me? Like, you want me to do this? Wait a minute. Are you sure you're talking to the right person? I think you're the wrong guy. Like, I am not the one you're looking for. And so often we disqualify what God is looking for because we don't feel like we're qualified to do this. We don't feel like we're good enough to do this. And then, so he questions number one, Gideon questions himself. And then second thing, Gideon actually questions God. This literally takes some guts, let's just be honest, to question God and say, okay, where have you been? If you have been with us, then this wouldn't have happened. If you would have done this, then this wouldn't have happened. Literally, he's telling God that you haven't been here for us. You have been doing what you're doing. And he's literally telling God, you did this to us. You allowed this to happen. And man, what a revelation of just of what this is, that when we live in a place of fear and anxiety and doubt and all these things, we will question our identity and we will question the identity of God. That's what happens. And so we see this, like, this is what happens when we live in fear. We question the identity of who we are and we question the identity of God. Again, forgetting the things that God has done for us. But then God gets real. Like, God gets real. God is, like, we use it all the time. God gets gangster with him really quick, really fast. Because it says in verse 14, but God said to him directly, go in the strength that is yours, save Israel from Midian. Have I not sent you? See, this just got real because God got all up in Gideon's business, all up in his face. Think about like when your mom or dad or even like whoever, like your boss or whoever gets up in your face and challenges the way that you think, challenges you to be better, challenges you that you have the potential to be more than who you are. Man, when you get close, that intimidating voice comes forward. And then verse 15, Gideon says again, me, master? How and with what could I ever do to save Israel? Look at me. My clan is the weakest in Manasseh. I'm the runt of the litter. And God said to him, I will be with you. Believe me, you'll defeat Midian as one man. See, now here comes the excuses. God gets back up in his face, and then Gideon begins to excuse of why we are in the condition we're in. This is why this can't happen. This is why it won't happen. I'm from this family. I'm from that family. I can't accomplish it. I can't accomplish that. All of a sudden, we see Gideon doing these things. Gideon reminds God that he is weak. But God reminds Gideon that his strength is not found within him, but within his relationship with God. So oftentimes we will tell God and we will disqualify ourselves and we will give every excuse why God cannot use us to do something. And God reminds us of how he can do something. So when we read through this passage, Gideon says, all right, here's the deal. I need a sign. I need a sign from you. I need you to prove to me something. And what's funny is we see Gideon ask for a sign more than once. And if you jump in, you can read through the passage in verse 20 through 21 and 22, 23, 24. You can read through this passage and you will find out that he's asking for a sign. And God gives it to him both times. Boom. And so then what Gideon does is Gideon builds an altar and worships him. And says, okay, I'm going to worship you in spirit and in truth, and I'm going to worship you. And that's what he does. But at that same night, God asks Gideon to do something that's very interesting, and this is where we take a turn. God commissions Gideon for his first mission after he gives him the sign that same night. See, sometimes what God asks you to do is not easy, but it has a purpose. And sometimes the purpose has to be more important than whether it's hard or easy. Because when God asks you to do something, he asks you to do something intentionally for a purpose. See, Gideon's dad, let me tell you a little bit about Joash. Joash was not a follower of God. In fact, Joash was the absolute opposite. Joash built these altars and he built these statues and he built these idols to worship the god Baal. Real quick, Baal was this fertility god who was believed to enable the earth to produce crops and people to produce children. And let me just tell you, the worship of Baal was insane. It was rooted in sexuality, involved with these ritualistic prostitution at a temple. It often required sacrifice of the firstborn. And the priests of Baal would always cut themselves and they would scream loud, just these insanely cries. And it was just a mess, a total mess. And like this was the god of Baal. And this is who they chose to worship and love and follow rather than God. This was Gideon's dad. Gideon's dad had built these idols and had built these statues in honor and altars in honor of Baal, saying that we are going to worship him. But this is what God says to him. It's really interesting. He says, I want you to go and tear down your father Baal's altar and chop down the fertility poles beside it. Then build an altar to God, your God, on top of the hill. The first commission to Gideon was to go home and to tear down the idols of his father. And I think what it does, it shows me this really cool concept as I read, that God wants you to first break down generational curses in your own life and in your own family before he commissions you to go and fight the war. See, before you're ready for the war, you have to go fight the battle of home. You have to break the general curses of anxiety, of fear, of alcoholism, of pornography, of whatever, of doubt, of whatever it might be. You know, generational curses are a real thing, and it's things that our fathers and forefathers and grandparents and great-grandparents and our family lineage have struggled with. Those are generational curses. Things that they have done that have not pleased God, and they've continued to pass those down from generation to generation. And what God told Gideon, go home and tear down those things first, and then I will let you go fight the war. See, Gideon had to fight against the cycle that his father was living in. He had to be determined to not live in the same atmosphere, the same mindset, and with the same heart that his father did. And so what does it say? Gideon was commissioned to go home first. So the very first thing Gideon does is he goes home and he tears down all of those idols, all of those statues, all of those fertility poles, and he builds an altar to God. And we have to understand that we will never win the battle out there until we win the battle in here at home first. We have to be ready to do what God has asked us to do. And I want to say this to you, if you're listening or if you're watching, you don't have to live in the same cycle that your parents did. You don't have to live their lifestyle. You don't have to live the way that they have. You might be in family and you might be the only Christian in your family. You might be a son or a daughter, or you might be a niece or a nephew, or you might be a mom and a dad. It doesn't matter who you are, but you do not need to live in the broken cycle that they have. See, parents generally want better for their children. However, sometimes the cycle creeps in and we continually live in that. But I want to tell you that you don't have to live that way. You don't have to worship that way. You don't have to live that lifestyle. You live according to what God calls you to live. You do what God calls you to do, to go home, to break those cycles, to live for him so that you can go out and fight the war and be the mighty warrior that you are, because God sees something inside of you that you might not even see. But in order for you to get to where you need to get to, you need to take care of the stuff at home first. A lot of times we don't hear that. A lot of times we don't think that way. But by the power of God and through Jesus and the help of the Holy Spirit, you can live a life that is completely designed for you, different than your family, different than everybody else. The cure for generational curses to be broken is going to be broken by you, by your mindset, by you repenting and saying, we are no longer going to live this way. We're no longer going to be addicted to this. We're no longer going to treat people this way. We're no longer going to live in this place of fear and anxiety and of failure. Let God find you where you're at. Let him do a work in your heart. Then go home to your home. Declare that over your household and over your family. And don't allow your family to be stuck in that cycle anymore. You know, I talked about in the very beginning how we start these things that we want to do, like working out and getting up early and eating right and doing all these things, and then we fall off. Can I tell you that when you begin to work out, you feel better? When you begin to get up earlier, you get more done. When you begin to, worry about the things that you need to worry about, like and how you do these things, and you begin to fix those, your life is better. Your life is better when you break the cycle. You will then live the way that you're intended to live, the way that God has commissioned you to live, if you break the cycle. Listen, if you want to break the cycle of generational curses in your life, cling to Jesus. Stay connected to Jesus as close as you can. And as you stay connected to Jesus, you will be able to break those things that are over your life, and you can start a brand new destiny, a brand new generational blessing over your family if you break the cycle. I'm not going to get into the rest of the story. You can jump into Judges chapter 6 and read the rest for yourself. Find out what happens. This is part 1. We're going to go into part 2 and talk about the call of Gideon of being that warrior. And so I hope that you tune into our next episode. I believe it's actually going to be episode 17 because we'll have one in between these. But I want you to check it out. I want you to hear it because I really believe it'll be a blessing. Listen, declare the goodness and grace of God over your life. Declare victory over those generational curses. Again, if you need to reach out to us, please do. You can find us at refugenetwork.org. We are on Facebook. We're on TikTok. We're on Instagram. If you need prayer for any of these things, contact us, please. We will pray with you and we will fight for you because we are better together. Continue to love Jesus and God with all of your heart. Continue to love people with all of your heart. When you do the first one right, you'll do the second one right. Hey, this is Refuge Radio. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great week.